I could have you removed from this house tonight. Gone by morning. No references, nothing.
You could try. I don't think it would go the way you're imagining.
And why is that?
Because the people you'd have to call to remove me already work for me. You just don't know that yet.
2 months earlier, no one in that house had ever heard that sentence or had any reason to believe it was true. Aria took the housekeeping position at the Ryu estate the same way she took most things in her life, quietly, and with a purpose she told no one. By her second night, she had already reorganized the linen inventory, memorized the household's routines, and noticed, without commenting on it, that the wine cellar's monthly delivery had shrunk by nearly a third over the past year, the kind of detail a household accountant would call belt-tightening and an outsider might call something else entirely. She met Minho on that second night, in an empty kitchen, both of them awake later than either wanted to admit. "You don't have to make yourself too," he said, startling her slightly. "I can make my own coffee." "I know," she said. "I just wasn't sure anyone was going to remind you to eat something today either, so I made extra." Minho studied her for a moment, something in the simple honesty of the gesture landing harder than it should have from a stranger 2 days into a job. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Genuinely. It's been a strange few months." "I pay attention," she said when he asked how she'd noticed. That became, over the following days, the entire shape of their friendship. He talked, she listened, and the household around them kept giving her small, quiet reasons to keep watching it closely. A week in, a delivery truck arrived at the Ryu's side gate carrying a shipment the household staff had been expecting for days, and Aria, glancing at the manifest before anyone else had thought to check it, stopped the driver before he could unload. "This isn't from the vendor listed on the paperwork," she said, running a finger down the invoice. "The routing code doesn't match anything this house has ordered from before." The head of household security, a broad, skeptical man named Officer Bay, looked at her like she'd grown a second head. "It's got the right stamps," he said. "What are you even looking at?" "Humor me," she said. "Hold it at the gates until someone confirms the origin directly." He did, reluctantly, and 2 hours later a call came back confirming the shipment had, in fact, been misrouted through a supplier the family had quietly stopped using months earlier, after a licensing dispute, the kind of paperwork error that could have caused real legal trouble if it had made it onto the property unflagged. Word of that moved through the household staff quickly, the new maid's reputation shifting overnight from competent to faintly strange, the kind of person people started watching a little more closely without being able to say exactly why.
Jaewon noticed her almost as fast as Minho had, though for entirely different reasons. He had grown up one room away from the family's future, close enough to smell it, never close enough to hold it. Minho, 3 years younger, had been named the eventual head of the legitimate business 2 years earlier, a decision made in a single-family meeting Jaewon hadn't even been invited to attend. "I built half of what that division runs on," he said once, low and bitter, to another cousin who didn't fully understand why it mattered so much to him. "And they handed the whole thing to him like I was never in the room." The cousin shrugged it off. "That's just how it goes in families like ours," he said. "It shouldn't be," Jaewon said, and something in the way he said it suggested he had stopped believing that a long time ago and had quietly decided somewhere in the years since to take what he felt he'd been owed instead of waiting to be given it. He had been the one 3 years earlier to rebuild the shipping division's client base after a scandal nearly sank it entirely, working 18-hour days for months while Minho was still finishing university abroad. When the succession decision came, none of that history had seemed to matter in the room where it was made. He confronted Minho once, early on, in a rare unguarded moment between them. "Do you ever wonder why they chose you?" Jae-won asked, not quite able to keep the edge fully out of his voice. Every day, Min-ho admitted. I didn't ask for it either, if that's any comfort. It isn't, Jae-won said, and walked away before the conversation could go any further, the resentment settling back into its usual quiet place beneath his composure, waiting. The new maid unsettled him from the start. She moved through the house like she already understood its rhythms, corrected a shipping error in front of a courier before anyone official had caught it, and once, without explanation, told the head cook to hold a delivery that turned out 2 days later to be tied to a supplier under federal review. How did you know? The cook asked her, genuinely rattled. I read the news, Arya said simply, and left it there. Jae-won heard about that incident within the hour. He did not believe the explanation for a second. He began watching her more carefully after that, and what he found unsettled him further. A call came in one evening for the household line, asking specifically for the new housekeeper, and the man on the other end, when Jae-won answered instead out of suspicion, identified himself as a senior partner at one of the city's largest private banks. I need to speak with her directly, the man said, his tone carrying a deference Jae-won had rarely heard anyone use towards household staff. It's regarding a matter she'll understand. Jae-won handed the phone over without a word and stood close enough to watch Arya take the call with an ease that made his stomach turn. That's handled, she said into the phone. Thank you for confirming. She hung up and returned to her work as though nothing unusual had happened at all. Who was that? Jae-won asked, unable to keep the edge out of his voice. A wrong number, eventually sorted out, she said, and walked away before he could press further. He did not believe that either. He began quietly making inquiries of his own, calling the staffing agency that had placed her, and found to his growing alarm almost no verifiable history behind her name before this placement, a gap that should have been impossible for someone with her apparent experience. He said nothing to the family yet. Instead, he had her room searched while she was occupied elsewhere in the house, and found little beyond a single tablet, powered off, tucked beneath a folded stack of uniforms, giving up nothing without a password he had no way of guessing. He put it back exactly where he'd found it, and left with more questions than he had arrived with. Min-ho, unaware of any of this, found himself noticing his own small inconsistencies about Arya in the weeks that followed, the kind that didn't add up to anything he could name, only a persistent, quiet sense that she was not entirely who her paperwork said she was. You talk like someone who's run a household before, he said to her once, watching her settle a dispute between 2 junior staff members with an ease that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than a few weeks of experience. Maybe I have, in a smaller way, she said, offering nothing further. Another evening, he caught her reading a financial newspaper left behind by a guest, folded open to a page of market analysis rather than the society section most visitors skimmed. Light reading, he said, amused. I like understanding how things actually work, she said, setting it aside without embarrassment. Underneath everything, most problems are just numbers that stopped telling the truth. That's an oddly specific thing for a housemaid to say, he said, half joking. She met his eyes for a moment longer than the comment required. I contain multitudes, she said lightly, and changed the subject before he could press further. He let it go each time, not because the questions stopped occurring to him, but because some part of him had already decided, quietly, that whoever she actually was beneath the uniform, he trusted the version of her he'd gotten to know regardless. The company's real trouble surfaced publicly 2 weeks later, when a major shipping contract the family had depended on for years was abruptly terminated, citing concerns about the family's financial stability that no one inside the house could immediately explain. Min-ho's father called an emergency meeting, and for the first time, the full weight of the collapse became impossible to keep contained within the family alone. We are going to lose the legitimate side of this business within the year if something doesn't change immediately, he said, his voice carrying a fear Min-ho had never heard from him before. An uncle at the far end of the table pressed further. The bank called yesterday about the line of credit, he said. They want a full audit before they'll extend anything further.
If we can't produce clean numbers within the month, they're pulling out entirely. The room fell into a tense, unhappy silence, the kind that comes from a family realizing, together, that the ground beneath them is less solid than any of them had allowed themselves to believe. Jae-won, seated near the back of the room, said nothing about the transfers he had spent nearly a year quietly moving between accounts that were never meant to touch, siphoning funds to cover both old debts and a resentment he had never learned how to voice any other way. Instead, he offered a solution. A marriage alliance with the Cho family secures immediate capital, he said, faster than chasing an investor who's never even agreed to a meeting. Minho's father, desperate enough to seize on anything solid, agreed within the hour, and by that evening, Minho found himself informed, rather than consulted, that his engagement to Yerin Sho would be announced within the week. "I don't love her," Minho told his father quietly. "I've met her twice." "Love is not the urgent problem in front of us right now," his father said. "Survival is." Yerin arrived at the estate 2 days later for what was framed as an introductory lunch, and Arya, serving at that table, caught something in the younger woman's expression that read less like ambition and more like quiet dread. "You must be new," Yerin said, the only person at that table who addressed her at all. "It's kind of you to keep everyone's glasses full during all this." "It's easy work, compared to some things," Arya said carefully. Yerin's eyes lingered on her a beat longer than the comment required. "I doubt that," she said quietly, and said nothing further at the table, though she found a reason to seek Arya out alone in the hallway before she left that afternoon. "I don't want this marriage either," Yerin said, bluntly, once they were out of earshot of anyone else. "I don't know you, and I don't know why I'm telling you this, except that you're the only person in that house today who looked at me like a person instead of a transaction." "I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of it," Arya said, honestly.
Yerin studied her for a moment. "You're not just staff, are you?" she said. "I don't know what you are, but whatever it is, if there's a way to stop this before it happens to either of us, I'd like to help." That was the beginning of an alliance neither family would learn about until it was far too late to stop. Over the following days, Arya pieced together, quietly, and through Yerin's access to conversations Arya herself wasn't present for, the full shape of what Jae-won had been doing. Yerin, present at a dinner where Jae-won drank more than he should have, came back with a fragment that confirmed what Arya had already begun to suspect. "He said something about finally getting what the family owed him," Yerin reported. "I didn't understand it at the time. I think I do now." The two women met again a few nights later, in a quiet corner of the estate's gardens where neither household staff nor family were likely to pass. "I still don't know what you actually are," Yerin admitted, watching Arya review a set of figures on her tablet with a fluency no housemaid should have had. "But whatever this is, I trust it more than I trust anything my own family has told me in months." "I'm not asking you to trust me blindly," Arya said. "I'm asking you to help me get one more piece of information, and then I think both of us get to walk away from something we never wanted in the first place." "What do you need?" Yerin asked. "Proof he's moved money in the last 2 weeks," Arya said. "Something recent enough that he can't claim it was a mistake made a long time ago and already handled." Yerin nodded slowly. "I can get close enough to his study to find out," she said. "He trusts me. He thinks I'm just the bride his family is buying him time with." "Be careful," Arya said. "If he suspects you for even a moment, I don't know what he's capable of at this point." "I've been careful my whole life," Yerin said quietly. "I'd like to try being brave, just this once." Yerin nearly didn't get away with it. She found her way into Jae-won's study 2 nights later under the pretense of leaving a note about wedding arrangements and had just photographed a set of transfer confirmations on his desk when she heard his footsteps in the hallway outside. She slid the papers back into place and was standing near the window, note in hand, when he opened the door. "You're up late," he said, his eyes moving briefly, suspiciously, across the surface of his own desk. "I couldn't decide on flowers," she said, holding up the note with a steadiness she did not fully feel. "I thought you might have an opinion, since apparently you have an opinion about everything else concerning this wedding."
Jaewon's expression eased slightly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Leave it on the desk," he said. "I'll look at it in the morning." She did, and left the room at a measured pace that cost her every bit of composure she had left, not breaking into a run until she was well down the hallway and certain he couldn't see her. She delivered the photographs to Arya within the hour, hands still faintly unsteady. "That was too close," Yeren said. "It was enough," Arya said, studying the dates. "This confirms it. He moved money 4 days ago. That's not an old mistake he's still cleaning up. That's active." Jaewon, sensing the walls closing in from a direction he hadn't fully anticipated, made his move before either woman was ready.
He went to Minho's father with a fabricated warning that the new maid was likely a corporate spy planted to gather leverage ahead of a rival acquisition, and pushed in the same breath to have the wedding moved forward by 2 weeks, citing the urgency of the shipping contract's termination as justification. Minho's father, still trusting his nephew more than he had any reason left to true, agreed to both. Arya learned of the accelerated timeline the same evening from Yeren, who arrived at the staff quarters pale and out of breath. "They're moving the wedding up, and I think he's going to have you removed from the house tonight," Yeren said. "I heard him on the phone with security." Arya absorbed that with a stillness that surprised even her. "Then it's time," she said quietly. The company's collapse became fully public 2 days later, creditors calling openly, the shipping contract's termination now common knowledge among the city's business circles, and Minho's father, out of every option he had once relied on, finally did the thing he had been trying and failing to do for months. He requested, through every remaining connection he had, an urgent audience with the elusive investor known only as the architect, the one figure with both the capital and the reputation to slow the bleeding before it became irreversible. Grace, fielding the request on Arya's behalf as she always did, called her late that night. "They're desperate," Grace said. "Truly desperate, not posturing. If you're going to do this, now is the moment." "I know," Arya said quietly. "I think I've known for days." "And Minho?" Grace asked carefully. "Are you ready for what happens to that part of it once the rest of the room finds out?" Arya was quiet for a long moment. "No," she admitted, "but I don't think waiting is going to make that any easier for either of us." The gathering was hastily arranged at the estate itself, family and remaining associates assembled in the same room where Jaewon had only days earlier pushed the wedding forward. Minho's father stood before them all, visibly exhausted, waiting for a stranger who had agreed, through an intermediary, to finally appear. "We don't know what she looks like," he admitted to the room. "We don't know anything about her, except that she may be the only chance this family has left." The doors opened, and Arya walked in, no longer in an apron, Yeren standing quietly beside her rather than at Jaewon's side where the family had expected her. A confused murmur moved through the room, several relatives glancing toward the maid they recognized and back toward the door, waiting for someone else to arrive. "I think there's been some confusion about who you were waiting for," Arya said, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "There isn't anyone else coming." Minho's father stared at her, uncomprehending. "I don't understand," he said. "I'm the architect," Arya said simply. "I've been in your kitchen making coffee for 2 months instead of taking meetings because I needed to understand who this family actually was before I ever considered investing a single dollar in it." The room went utterly silent, the particular silence of dozens of people simultaneously reconstructing the last 2 months around a single sentence. An aunt near the front pressed her hand to her mouth. "She's been serving us dinner," she said faintly. A cousin who once complained openly in front of Arya that a maid had no business overhearing family business went visibly pale, clearly running back through everything he'd said in her presence over the past 2 months. Officer B, standing near the wall, let out a short, disbelieving breath. "The shipment," he muttered. "She was right about the shipment." Minho, standing near the back of the room, felt the ground shift under an entire relationship he had thought he understood. Betrayal and disbelief and something achingly close to relief, all arriving in the same breath. He thought of the financial newspaper, the offhand comment about numbers that stopped telling the truth, a dozen small moments that had never quite added up until this one finally did. "You're her," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else in the room. "I am," Arya said, holding his gaze for a moment before turning back to the rest of the family. "And before anyone asks me to save this company, you need to understand why it's collapsing in the first place. It was never the market." She laid the folder she carried on the table in front of them. The transfers, the pattern, nearly a year of funds moved quietly out of the family's accounts and into Jaewon's. 11 months, she said, dressed up carefully enough that no single month looked alarming on its own. Jaewon's face had already gone pale, every excuse he might have reached for collapsing before he could voice it. "I built this division," he said, his voice cracking. "I gave this family everything, and they handed the future to him instead, like I was never even in the room. I took what I felt I was owed." "You didn't take what you were owed," Minho's father said, his voice low and shaking with a grief that hadn't fully hardened into anger yet. "You took what belonged to everyone in this room, and you let us blame a collapsing market for something you did with your own hands." Yeren, who had said nothing until that moment, finally spoke, addressing her own family rather than the Ryu's. "I'm not marrying into a rushed alliance built on a lie I helped uncover," she said. "If this family needs an honest partnership going forward, I'd rather it be that or nothing at all." Her mother, standing near the door, looked too stunned by the unraveling scene to argue. The consequences for Jaewon followed swiftly, the family choosing accountability over the quiet cover-up that let his resentment fester unchecked for years in the first place. Minho spent the following morning sitting with his father, the two of them absorbing a betrayal neither had seen coming from someone they had trusted without question their entire lives. "I keep going back through years of conversations, wondering how much of it was already a lie by then," his father said quietly. "You don't have to have that figured out today," Minho said. "I don't think either of us is finished being angry yet." That evening, once the house had finally gone quiet, Minho found Arya on the terrace, the same place he had once told her about a marriage he never wanted. "I don't know how to just trust easily again," he said honestly. "Even now, some part of me is still catching up to the fact that the woman I fell for these past 2 months was also quietly deciding whether my entire family was worth the risk." "I know," she said. "I'm not going to pretend that isn't fair. I can only tell you that the parts of this that felt real to you were real to me too. I didn't plan on falling for you. I didn't stop it once I noticed it happening either." "Was any part of this still a transaction to you?" he asked honestly. "Even now?" "The company maybe still is, in the sense that I believe in what it could become," she said. "You never were. I don't know how to prove that except by staying and letting you watch for as long as it takes." "I want to believe that," he said finally. "I think I need some time before I fully do." "That's fair," she said. "Take it. I'm not going anywhere this time, and I'm not going to hide behind an apron to prove it either."
The people who underestimated her spent 2 months walking past the one person who could have saved them, simply because she wore an apron instead of a name they recognized. Some of them would spend a long time afterward wondering what else they'd missed by only ever looking at what a person appeared to be. If you were Minho's father, could you have forgiven a nephew you raised like a son for what he did to save his own pride? Tell me in the comments, and subscribe to see whether this family and this romance actually survive what tonight uncovered.